You know that feeling when someone who treated you like garbage during your lowest moments suddenly wants to be best friends again now that things are going well for you? Picture this. It's 2 a.m. and you can't sleep because you just saw their name pop up in your notifications. Just a casual, "Hey, we should catch up soon," with a smiley face, like nothing ever happened. And your stomach does that thing where it drops and twists at the same time because you remember exactly what they said to you when you were struggling. You remember the tone. You remember how small they made you feel. You remember crying in your car after hanging out with them. And now everyone's telling you to just let it go. Move on. Be the bigger person. They're saying, you've forgiven them, right? So why are you still being weird about hanging out? But here's the thing nobody's talking about. You have forgiven them. You're not angry anymore. You don't wish them harm. But you also don't want them anywhere near you. And somehow that makes you the villain in everyone else's story. Yeah, we need to talk about this. So there I was, 3 months ago, sitting in a coffee shop with someone I used to call my best friend. Let me call her Sarah. We hadn't really talked in about a year, which, if you know the backstory, wasn't an accident. About a year and a half ago, I was going through it. And I mean going through it. I had just lost my job, my relationship had ended badly, and I was living with my parents at 26 years old, trying to figure out what I was even doing with my life. I felt like such a failure. Like I had taken 10 steps backward while everyone else was posting their promotions and engagement photos. And Sarah? Sarah was one of the people I thought I could count on. We'd been friends since college. We'd been through breakups together, complained about bad bosses together, celebrated every little win together. So when everything fell apart, I reached out to her. I needed my person, you know? But here's what happened next. And I want you to really hear this because I know I'm not the only one who's experienced this. The first time I tried to talk to her about what I was going through, she said, "Yeah, that sounds rough," and then immediately changed the subject to talk about her new apartment. Okay, I thought, maybe she's just distracted. Maybe I caught her at a bad time. The second time, I was more direct. I said, "Hey, I'm really struggling right now and I could use a friend." And you know what she said? She said, "I mean, we all have our stuff, you know? You just have to stay positive and things will work out." Then she spent 20 minutes talking about her promotion at work. But the third time? The third time is when I knew something had fundamentally changed. I had asked her if she wanted to grab dinner, nothing fancy, just like our old hangouts. And she said yes. So there I was, sitting across from her at this casual restaurant, and I started telling her about a job interview I'd bombed earlier that week. I was trying to laugh it off, but you could probably hear in my voice that I was actually devastated. And that's when I realized she wasn't even really listening. She was on her phone, just casually scrolling while I was mid-sentence. So I stopped talking, just to see if she'd notice. She didn't. 30 seconds of silence, maybe 40. And then she looked up and said, "Sorry, what?" No explanation, no, "I'm dealing with something urgent." Just, "Sorry, what?" And that's when I realized something that made my chest feel tight. She was uncomfortable with my struggle. Like, genuinely uncomfortable. She didn't know what to do with a version of me that wasn't successful and happy and easy to be around. But wait, it gets worse. A few weeks later, I saw on social media that she'd had this big group hangout. Like 10 people at her place. People we both knew. People I thought were my friends too. And I wasn't invited. Not even a courtesy text like, "Hey, having people over but keeping it small." Nothing. When I casually mentioned it to her later, she said, and I quote, "Oh yeah, I mean, I didn't think you'd want to come. You've been so, I don't know, negative lately. We were all just trying to have a fun night, you know?" Negative. That's what she called me going through one of the hardest periods of my life. Negative. I remember exactly where I was when she said that. I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of a grocery store, and I just stared at my phone after we hung up. And I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger exactly. It was more like clarity, cold hard clarity. This person who I had supported through her bad breakup, who I had helped move apartments twice, who I had listened to complain about her job for hours on end, who I had celebrated every single win with genuine excitement. This person couldn't handle me being anything less than happy and successful. And that's when I realized I was alone in this friendship. I had been for a while. So I did what a lot of us do when we finally see the truth. I pulled back. I stopped reaching out. I stopped trying. And honestly, she barely noticed, which told me everything I needed to know. But then, my life started turning around. I got a really good job. I moved into my own place. I started feeling like myself again. And I started posting about it, just normal life updates. And guess who suddenly remembered I existed? Yeah. Sarah started liking my posts again, commenting with exclamation points, sending me those "we need to catch up" messages, acting like we were still close, acting like she hadn't completely abandoned me when I needed her. And everyone around me was like, "Oh, Sarah reached out? That's great. You guys should totally reconnect." Like it was that simple. Like I should just forget what happened. So that's how I ended up sitting across from her in that coffee shop 3 months ago. Because I thought maybe I'm being too harsh. Maybe I'm holding on to something I should let go of. Maybe I should give her another chance. And you know what happened? She spent the entire hour talking about herself, her job, her new boyfriend, her vacation plans. And when I mentioned that the past year and a half had been tough but I was in a better place now, she said, "Yeah, I'm so glad you're like normal again. That was such a weird phase for you." A weird phase. Like my struggle was some personality quirk I'd grown out of. And that's when I realized something important. I had forgiven her. Truly. I wasn't angry. I didn't hate her. I didn't want bad things to happen to her. But I also realized that forgiveness and friendship are not the same thing. And nobody had ever told me that was okay. Here's what I wish someone had told me when I was beating myself up for not wanting to be friends with someone I'd forgiven. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. And it definitely doesn't mean giving someone unlimited access to you again. You know what that means? It means you can release the anger, you can let go of the resentment, you can genuinely wish someone well from a distance, and still decide that they don't get to be in your inner circle anymore. And that doesn't make you petty. It doesn't make you bitter. It doesn't make you someone who holds grudges. It makes you someone who has learned what you deserve. Can you relate to this? Because I think we all have at least one person in our lives who showed us exactly who they were when we were struggling, and now they're confused about why we're not jumping at the chance to be close again. And here's the thing that nobody talks about. The thing that makes this so isolating. Our society has this weird relationship with forgiveness where we've conflated it with reconciliation. We've been taught that if you've truly forgiven someone, you should be able to go back to the way things were. That boundaries mean you haven't really forgiven them. That keeping your distance means you're still bitter. But that's not how healing works. That's not how protection works. Here's what I learned, and I mean this. When someone shows you that they can't handle you at your lowest, they've given you information, crucial information. They've shown you that their presence in your life is conditional, that their support has limits, that their friendship comes with requirements about who you're allowed to be. And you know what? That's okay. Not everyone is equipped to show up for people during hard times. Some people are sunshine friends. They're great when everything's great. But when the weather changes, they're nowhere to be found. And here's what I wish someone had told me. You're allowed to thank them for showing you who they are, forgive them for not being who you needed, and then make different choices about how close you let them get. Because forgiveness is for you. It's about releasing the weight you've been carrying. It's about not letting their behavior keep you stuck in anger and hurt. It's about your own peace. But boundaries? Boundaries are also for you. They're about protecting your peace. They're about honoring what you've learned. They're about making sure that the people who get access to you are people who've earned it. We all have a limited amount of emotional energy. We all have a finite amount of vulnerability we can offer. And when you've been through something hard, when you've been kicked while you were down, you learn to be more careful about who you give that vulnerability to. That's not bitterness. That's wisdom. Am I the only one who feels like we're expected to be infinitely forgiving and never protective? Like we're supposed to just keep letting people hurt us and calling it grace? Because here's what really happens when you forgive someone but maintain boundaries. People get confused. They get offended. They accuse you of not really forgiving them. They say you're living in the past, or can't let things go. But what they're really saying is, I want the benefits of your forgiveness without any consequences for my actions. And that's not how this works. You can forgive someone for how they made you feel small and still remember how they made you feel small. You can forgive someone for abandoning you when you needed them and still choose not to depend on them again. You can forgive someone for being conditional in their love and still decide that you need unconditional people in your inner circle. Here's what everyone needs to understand about this struggle. When you're going through a hard time, you find out who your real people are. You find out who shows up, who checks in, who makes space for your mess, who doesn't need you to be okay to still love you. And when you come out the other side, when you rebuild, when you rise again, you don't forget who was there and who wasn't. You can't. It's written into your story. It's part of what shaped you. And the people who weren't there? They don't get to act like they were. They don't get to waltz back into your life now that you're successful and happy and easier to love. They don't get to rewrite history and pretend they supported you all along. You know what that means? It means you get to be selective. You get to be protective. You get to build your circle intentionally with people who've proven they can handle all versions of you, not just the winning one. And if that makes some people uncomfortable, that's okay. Their comfort is not your responsibility. Here's what I need you to hear. Forgiveness without boundaries is just self-abandonment with a spiritual name. Let me say that again because it's important. Forgiveness without boundaries is just self-abandonment with a spiritual name. You're not being petty for remembering. You're not being bitter for protecting yourself. You're not being unforgiving for choosing distance. You're being smart. You're being self-aware. You're honoring what you've learned about who people are when the stakes are real. And here's the misconception that I think causes so much guilt around this. We think forgiveness means the relationship has to be restored. We think it means things have to go back to normal. We think it means we have to pretend it never happened. But forgiveness actually means, I'm not going to let what you did keep poisoning me. I'm not going to carry this anger around like a backpack full of rocks. I'm going to release you from the debt you owe me because carrying it is hurting me more than it's hurting you. But releasing the debt doesn't mean handing you another loan. You know what I realized? The people who are most offended by your boundaries are the people who benefited most from you having none. Think about that. The people who are calling you bitter? They're often the ones who want unlimited access without earning it. The people who are saying you need to let it go? They're often the ones who want you to forget so they don't have to feel uncomfortable about how they treated you. But your healing is not about making other people comfortable. Your boundaries are not about protecting their feelings. Your forgiveness is not about giving them a free pass back into your life. It's about you, your peace, your protection, your wisdom. And if people can't understand that, if they can't respect that, then they're proving exactly why those boundaries are necessary. But then something happened that changed everything for me. So I'm at this wedding about a month ago, right? And I'm talking to this woman who's probably in her 50s, super successful executive, just really put together. And somehow we get on this topic of old friendships and forgiveness. I don't even remember how we got there, but we did. And I start telling her about Sarah. About feeling guilty for keeping my distance even though I've forgiven her. about people thinking I'm being petty or holding grudges. And you know what this woman did? She looked at me with this expression I'll never forget and said, "Good for you." I literally couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was like, "Wait, what?" And she said, "Good for you for learning that lesson in your 20s instead of your 40s like I did." So of course I asked her what she meant. And she told me this story that completely changed how I thought about all of this. She said when she was around my age, she had this group of friends from college. They'd all been super close. But then she went through a divorce in her early 30s. Messy divorce. And most of her friends basically disappeared. They stopped inviting her to things. They were awkward when she tried to talk about what she was going through. A few of them even stayed friends with her ex-husband instead of her. She said it devastated her at the time. Made her feel like she was the problem. Like her struggle made her unlovable or something. But then she rebuilt her life. Got an amazing job. Started dating someone great. Moved to a new city. And guess what happened? Those old friends started reaching out. Wanting to visit. Wanting to reconnect. Acting like they'd always been supportive. And here's the part that got me. She said she let them back in. All of them. Because she thought that's what she was supposed to do. She thought forgiveness meant full reconciliation. She thought keeping boundaries made her bitter. So she welcomed them back. Flew them out to visit. Made effort to rebuild the friendships. And you know what happened? The second she went through another hard time, they did the exact same thing. They disappeared. They got uncomfortable. They couldn't handle her being anything less than perfect. But this time she lost 2 years of her life trying to maintain friendships with people who had shown her twice who they really were. And she looked at me and said, "I wish someone had told me that forgiveness doesn't mean giving someone another chance to hurt you. I wish someone had told me that it's okay to remember. That it's smart to remember." And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about me and Sarah. This was about a pattern. A lesson. A protection mechanism that I was learning early. She said, "The people who show up when you're struggling, those are your people. The ones who can handle your mess, who don't need you to be okay to still love you, who stick around when it's hard. Those are the ones you protect. Those are the ones you invest in. Everyone else? They can be acquaintances. They can be people you're friendly with. But they don't get the inner circle. They don't get the vulnerability. Because they've already shown you what they do with it." And then she said something that made me want to cry right there at this wedding reception. She said, "You're not being unforgiving by remembering. You're being faithful to yourself. You're honoring what you learned. And that's not bitterness. That's self-respect." I literally stood there trying not to cry in my cocktail dress because nobody had ever framed it that way before. And here's what completely flipped for me in that moment. I had been thinking about this all wrong. I thought I had two options. Either be angry and cut Sarah off completely, or forgive her and let her back in fully. Those were the only options I thought I had. And here's what completely flipped for me in that moment. I had been thinking about this all wrong. I thought I had two options. Either be angry and cut Sarah off completely, or forgive her and let her back in fully. Those were the only options I thought I had. And that third option, it wasn't the bitter one. It wasn't the petty one. It was actually the most mature one. Because here's what I finally understood. The goal isn't to go back to how things were. The goal is to move forward with wisdom. The goal is to build a life surrounded by people who've proven they can love all versions of you, not just the successful, happy, easy version. And you know what else she told me? She said, "The people who are meant to be in your life won't need you to explain your boundaries. They'll understand them. They'll respect them. And they'll probably admire you for having them." And I realized she was right. Because the people in my life now, the ones who showed up when I was struggling, they completely understood when I told them I was keeping Sarah at a distance. They didn't question it. They didn't tell me to let it go. They said, "That makes sense. You're protecting yourself. Good." And I realized she was right. Because the people in my life now, the ones who showed up when I was struggling? They completely understood when I told them I was keeping Sarah at a distance. They didn't question it. They didn't tell me to let it go. They said, "That makes sense. You're protecting yourself. Good." And that's when everything changed for me. That's when I stopped feeling guilty. That's when I realized that forgiveness without boundaries wasn't spiritually evolved or emotionally mature. It was just people-pleasing disguised as grace. So here's what I want you to know if you're going through this right now. If you have someone in your life who hurt you when you were down and now wants to act like it never happened, you're not wrong for remembering. You're not petty for protecting yourself. You're not bitter for choosing distance. You're wise. You're self-aware. And you're honoring what you've learned about who people are when things get real. And I want to hear from you because I know I'm not the only one dealing with this. Write me a comment about a time when someone showed you who they were during your struggle. Tell me about the people who disappeared when things got hard. Share your story about trying to figure out this whole forgiveness versus boundaries thing. Like this if you needed to hear this today. Hit that like button if you've been made to feel guilty for protecting yourself after forgiving someone. Smash that like if you're learning that forgiveness doesn't mean friendship. Because here's what I'm realizing. We're all walking around thinking we're the only ones dealing with this. We're all feeling guilty for having boundaries. We're all wondering if we're being too harsh or too unforgiving. But we're not alone in this struggle. Drop a comment telling me about someone who came back around after you succeeded and acted like they'd always been there. I want to hear your story about navigating this. Tell me in the comments how you're learning to forgive people without letting them close again. And here's what I want you to remember. The people who get offended by your boundaries are usually the people who benefited from you having none. The people who call you bitter for protecting yourself are usually the people who want access they haven't earned. But the people who really love you, they'll understand. They'll respect it. They'll protect those boundaries with you. So let's build a space in these comments where we can be real about this stuff. Where we can talk about forgiveness without pretending it means forgetting. Where we can validate each other's boundaries without calling them bitter. Where we can share our stories about learning who our real people are. Because we're all figuring this out together. We're all learning that you can release someone from the debt they owe you without giving them another loan. We're all discovering that wisdom sometimes looks like distance. We're all realizing that the most loving thing you can do for yourself is remember. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, someone who's been feeling guilty for protecting themselves after forgiving someone, send this their way. Share this with that person who's struggling with an old friend who wants back in but hasn't earned it. Because this message needs to reach everyone who's been made to feel like boundaries make them bitter. You're not bitter. You're not petty. You're not unforgiving. You're learning. You're growing. You're protecting the person you've worked so hard to become. And that's not something to feel guilty about. That's something to be proud of. We're all in this together. And I'll see you in the comments.